Before the sun rose over the Pacific, a Navy SEAL lay dying on a steel table, his heart drowning in its own silence. Protocol said wait. Power said stand down. But one woman, unranked, watched, almost erased, chose to act. She cut where she was told not to, fought time itself, and pulled a life back from the edge, while powerful men argued over rules. Outside, a wounded dog waited by the gate, as if it understood that courage sometimes looks like staying. That night, the ocean refused to stay quiet, and neither did the truth. What happens next will make you believe in quiet miracles and second chances for the forgotten. Before we begin, tell me where you are watching from. Drop your country in the comments below. If you believe no child or animal should ever face fear alone, hit subscribe now and share this story with someone who needs hope. San Diego, before dawn, felt unfinished. The marine layer pressed low over the city, dulling the edges of streetlights and softening the horizon until sky and ocean blurred into the same muted gray. The air carried salt, fuel, and cold concrete, a smell that belonged to ports and early hours, to places where work began before most people woke. The ocean was close enough to be felt, even when it couldn't be seen. It moved somewhere beyond the buildings, patient and relentless. The Naval Medical Center rose from the street with the blunt certainty of a structure that did not ask for affection. Concrete, glass, controlled entrances, a building designed to endure pressure rather than offer comfort. At 5:42 a.m., Harper Reed walked through the main doors carrying a canvas backpack and no visible rank. She moved with quiet precision, her steps measured, posture upright, without stiffness. Harper was of average height, lean but not fragile, her body shaped by long hours on her feet rather than a gym. Dark brown hair, threaded faintly with copper in certain light, was pulled back into a low knot meant to stay put, not to be noticed. Her face held sharp lines softened by fatigue, high cheekbones, a straight nose, lips that rarely parted unless there was a reason. Her skin was pale from time spent under artificial light, and her eyes, gray-green and steady, took in details without announcing judgment. She wore navy scrubs beneath a lightweight jacket with frayed cuffs and a stubborn zipper. It was the kind of jacket someone kept because it still worked, not because it looked good. At the security desk, a young corporal glanced up. His eyes flicked to the backpack, then to Harper's chest, where there was no badge. "Contractor?" he asked, neutral, already halfway to moving on. "Medical," Harper said. She didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. The corporal nodded and waved her through. It was easier for people to accept the first explanation that allowed them to return to their routine. Inside, the hospital smelled of disinfectant layered over stale coffee. The night shift lingered in clusters, nurses with drawn faces, residents hunched over monitors, eyes red from lack of sleep. Somewhere down the corridor, a cardiac monitor beeped with mechanical regularity, the sound cutting cleanly through the quiet. Harper paused for only a second, enough to orient herself. She noted the layout, the flow of foot traffic, the way people unconsciously avoided certain corridors. Hospitals revealed their stress points even when nothing appeared wrong. Behind the central desk stood Linda Morales, late 40s, dark hair cut blunt at her shoulders and streaked with gray she made no effort to hide. She held herself with the authority of someone who had earned respect through endurance rather than charm. One hand wrapped around a paper cup, the other scrolled through a screen with practiced impatience. "You're early," Morales said, eyes lifting to Harper's face, then dropping briefly to the empty space where an ID should have been. "Habit," Harper replied. Morales' mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "You knew? Transfer?" It was accurate enough. Morales tapped at her keyboard, frowned, then sighed. "Admin's behind, again." She slid a temporary sticker across the counter. "Temp staff," Harper's name handwritten underneath. "Put that on so nobody thinks you're lost family." Harper pressed the sticker onto her scrub top. It sat crooked, one corner already peeling. "If you want coffee," Morales added, "it's in the lounge. And if you want to be useful, we're short." Harper nodded. Useful was a familiar assignment. The staff lounge was dim, lit by a single fluorescent panel that hummed faintly. A battered coffee machine gurgled on the counter, releasing the sharp, burnt smell of beans pushed past their limits. Harper poured herself a cup of black coffee and took a slow sip. It tasted thin and bitter. She drank it anyway. A man sat at one of the tables near the window, leaning back in his chair with an ease that suggested long familiarity with tension. Miles Ortega, late 30s, broad-shouldered, with a build that spoke of strength maintained for function rather than appearance. His hair was cropped short, dark with silver, beginning to thread at the temples. A scar split his left eyebrow, giving his expression a permanent hint of amusement. His eyes were alert, curious, missing nothing. He watched Harper over the rim of his cup. "You don't look like admin," he said. "I'm not," she replied. "Good," he said. "Admin never shows up before sunrise." He extended a hand. "Miles. Harper." His handshake was firm without aggression, the grip of someone who understood restraint. "You here for the rumor?" Miles asked. "Which one?" He smiled. "SEAL training accident offshore. Sounds ugly." Harper's gaze drifted toward the trauma wing. "When?" "Soon. Real soon." The words hadn't finished settling when a paramedic burst into the lounge, breathless. "Flight confirmed," he said. "Multiple SEALs inbound. One thoracic at least." The room shifted instantly. Chairs scraped back. Coffee cups were abandoned. The air tightened. Harper set her cup down and moved. In pre-op, Petty Officer Ben Wyatt lay on a gurney, hands clasped loosely over his abdomen. 26. Athletic, sun-darkened skin, blonde hair shaved close to the scalp. He wore the controlled calm of someone trained to endure discomfort without complaint, but his eyes tracked every movement in the room. A resident read off vitals. "Stable, cleared for anesthesia." Harper stepped closer. "I'm Dr. Reed," she said evenly. "I'm going to listen." She placed the stethoscope against his chest. The rhythm was steady, too steady. Then there it was, a pause, subtle, easy to miss if you weren't listening for it. She listened again. "You had any dizziness lately?" she asked. Wyatt hesitated. "Sometimes after drills, figured it was dehydration." Harper straightened. "I want an EKG." The attending physician, a tall man with perfect hair and a voice accustomed to being obeyed, exhaled sharply. "He's a SEAL," he said. "They're built for stress." "They're built like everyone else," Harper replied. "Just train not to say it hurts." A beat passed. Then the attending gestured. "Fine." The machine whirred. Paper slid out. The resident's expression shifted first. The attending leaned in, jaw tightening as he read. Heavy footsteps approached. A man entered the bay without announcement, his presence immediately altering the room's gravity. Commander Noah Calder, late 30s, tall and solid, shoulders squared by years of command. His hair was dark and closely cut, his face clean-shaven but defined by hard angles and a permanent crease between the brows. His eyes, blue-gray, cold as deep water, went straight to the patient. "What's happening?" he asked. "Undiagnosed conduction abnormality," Harper said before anyone else could speak. "If you'd induced anesthesia, he could have arrested." Calder's gaze locked on to her, measuring. "You sure?" "Yes." He nodded once. "Then he doesn't go under." No one argued. Outside, the distant thud of helicopter blades rolled through the building. As teams moved to prepare the emergency department, Harper stepped back, hands resting loosely at her sides. Calder glanced at her once more before turning to follow his men. Miles passed her in the hallway, eyes wide. "Hell of a first morning," he muttered. Harper allowed a brief, thin smile. "They usually are." The emergency department doors burst open moments later, letting in cold air and chaos. Stretchers rolled in, voices sharpened, orders cut through the noise. Harper Reed squared her shoulders and stepped forward, just as the tide finally began to break. The emergency department never exploded all at once. It tightened first, like a muscle bracing for impact. The air grew louder before the people did, ventilation shifting, monitors chirping more frequently, radios crackling with clipped voices from triage. By the time the first gurney crossed the threshold, the room had already accepted that the day would not be gentle. Harper Reed stood just inside the emergency bay, hands relaxed at her sides, eyes moving constantly. She did not rush. She mapped. 4 incoming SEALs. 1 stabilized in pre-op thanks to a caught rhythm that should have killed him. 3 more critical, 1 unknown. The rhythm of the department shifted around her, but she stayed still long enough to understand where the cracks would appear. Commander Noah Calder entered moments later, already stripped of hesitation. Up close, the lines in his face were more visible, creases cut deep by sun and stress, a jaw that had learned to stay clenched even when rest was possible. He moved with the economy of someone who had learned that speed meant nothing without control. When he spoke, people listened, not because he demanded it, but because they trusted that he would not waste words. Bay 1 and 2, he said calmly. Trauma priority. I want vitals called out, not assumed. A nurse nodded sharply and moved. A resident hesitated, then followed. Harper noticed the hesitation. It mattered. The first SEAL arrived unconscious, blood soaking through a field dressing that had already done all it could. His name was Mark Delaney, early 30s, powerful build, even slack with injury, brown hair plastered to his forehead with sweat and seawater. His beard was trimmed short, regulation, but it could not hide the tension carved into his jaw. He had been a breacher, the kind of man trained to move first into places others avoided. Today, his body had moved faster than his luck. BP dropping, a nurse called. 80 systolic. Get me access now, Harper said, her voice level but firm. The resident nearest her glanced instinctively toward Calder, then back to Harper. Calder caught the exchange and made no correction. That silence was permission. Harper stepped in, hands already gloved. She assessed with touch as much as sight, fingers pressing lightly along Delaney's ribs, abdomen, neck. His chest rose unevenly, too shallow on the right. She did not need the ultrasound to know what was coming, but she welcomed its confirmation. Tension pneumothorax, she said. We don't have time. The resident froze, breath caught somewhere between training and fear. Harper felt it ripple outward, the dangerous pause where everyone waited for rank to speak. She moved anyway. The needle decompression was clean, decisive. Air hissed free, loud enough to make a nurse flinch. Delaney's chest rose more evenly. The monitor steadied, just enough. Chest tube next, Harper said. Now. This time, no one questioned. Her. Calder watched from the edge of the bay, arms crossed, eyes sharp. He had seen battlefield medicine before, had relied on it, but seeing it executed inside a stateside hospital unsettled something deeper. It stripped away the illusion that distance made war cleaner. The second SEAL arrived conscious but pale, hands shaking despite his efforts to control them. Evan Brooks, mid-20s, lean, red-haired, freckles stark against ashen skin. He tried to joke through clenched teeth, the humor brittle, a reflex more than a choice. Doc, he said weakly to Harper as she leaned over him. You're not going to tell my CO I cried, right? Harper met his eyes briefly. You didn't, she said. You're breathing. That earned a thin smile before pain stole it back. As the team worked, a man appeared near the back of the department, out of place in his pressed civilian coat. Victor Hale did not raise his voice or push forward. He did not need to. In his early 60s, tall and slender, with silver hair combed neatly back and a face that looked kind, until you noticed how rarely it moved, Hale had the patience of someone accustomed to waiting while other people made mistakes. His hands were clasped loosely behind his back, posture immaculate. He watched the room like a chessboard. Beside him stood his son, Evan Hale, late 20s, dark-haired, handsome in a way that felt calculated. His eyes moved constantly, not missing reactions, filing them away. Where his father radiated stillness, Evan carried restless energy, fingers tapping lightly against his thigh, a smile that never reached his eyes. Calder noticed them and frowned. What are they doing here? A nurse lowered her voice. Victor Hale's company sponsors some of our equipment. Calder's jaw tightened. Sponsorships had a way of blurring lines that should remain sharp. Harper did not look at the Hales. She was focused on Delaney as the chest tube slid into place, blood following air, confirming internal damage that would not wait politely. We need OR, the resident said. Not yet, Harper replied. He won't make transport like this. The words landed heavy. Calder stepped forward. Explain. Internal bleeding, Harper said. Likely splenic. If we move him now, we lose him in the hallway. Calder studied Delaney's vitals, the numbers already slipping again. He weighed options the way commanders did, quickly, without illusion. What do you need? Space corpuscite, Harper said, and blood. Calder nodded once. You have it. The decision rippled outward. Nurses moved faster. A tech ran for supplies. The resident swallowed hard and followed Harper's lead, hands shaking but willing. From the corner of the room, Evan Hale watched with open interest. She's bold, he murmured to his father. Victor Hale's smile deepened just enough to be dangerous. Bold people are useful, he said, or they're expendable. Time tells. The procedure was not elegant. It was necessary. Harper worked with precision born of repetition, not bravado. Her movements were efficient, her voice calm. When the bleeding slowed and the numbers climbed, the room exhaled collectively. Delaney was stabilized enough for transport. As he was wheeled away, his eyes fluttered open briefly. He focused on Harper, confusion giving way to recognition of authority that had nothing to do with rank. "Thank you," he rasped. Harper nodded. "Stay alive," she replied. "We'll do the rest." Afterward, the department did not immediately return to normal. It never did. The energy shifted instead, becoming watchful. People looked at Harper differently now, not with open doubt, but with caution. Skill that appeared without introduction made people uneasy. Calder approached her near the scrub sink, water running loud between them. "You didn't hesitate," he said. "There wasn't time," Harper replied, rinsing blood from her hands. "That's not what I meant." He studied her profile, the set of her jaw, the absence of self-congratulation. "Most people hesitate anyway." Harper shut off the water. "Most people haven't learned what hesitation costs." Calder absorbed that quietly. "Admin will ask questions. They always do." He hesitated, then asked, "Where did you train?" Harper met his gaze. "Places where you didn't get second chances." Before he could press further, Linda Morales approached, her expression tight. "Commander," she said, "we've got an issue." "What kind?" "Her file," Morales said, glancing at Harper. "It's restricted, not missing. Restricted." Calder's eyes narrowed. He looked at Harper again, this time with something new layered over respect. "We'll talk," he said. From across the room, Victor Hale turned away, already dialing a number. Evan followed, grin sharpening. The emergency department settled into a tense equilibrium. No alarms screaming, no blood on the floor, just the uneasy knowledge that something had shifted, and not everyone was comfortable with where it might lead. Harper Reed dried her hands and pulled her gloves off slowly. She felt the familiar weight settle in her chest. Not fear, not pride, but consequence. Being seen always came with a price. Outside, the marine layer began to thin, light pressing gently against the hospital windows. The tide had broken. Now came the reckoning. Morning did not arrive cleanly. The marine layer thinned in patches, letting pale sunlight slip through the hospital windows in uneven bands that made the floors look stained rather than bright. The emergency department had settled into a strained calm, the kind that followed violence when everyone moved more carefully, as if sound itself might trigger another collapse. Harper Reed stood at a workstation near the trauma wing, updating notes with deliberate precision. Her handwriting was spare, almost severe, every word chosen for function rather than style. She did not document heroics. She documented facts, time of intervention, vital changes, temporary stabilization, nothing more. Across the room, Commander Noah Calder spoke quietly with Linda Morales. Calder's posture had loosened just a fraction since the worst had passed, but his eyes remained sharp, scanning the department the way a field commander scanned terrain. He listened without interrupting, hands clasped behind his back, jaw set. "Restricted," Morales said again, lowering her voice. "Not redacted, not missing. Restricted at a federal level." Calder nodded once. "That narrows it." Morales glanced toward Harper. She didn't flinch when things went bad. That's not arrogance. That's familiarity. Calder's gaze followed hers, or training that didn't come from residency. Before Morales could respond, a man approached from the administrative corridor, his footsteps measured, unhurried. Dr. Samuel Price was in his mid-50s, tall and narrow, with thinning sandy hair combed carefully to one side. His beard was trimmed close, the kind of beard worn by men who wanted to appear approachable without sacrificing authority. Years of hospital politics had etched caution into his face. He smiled often, but his eyes rarely did. "Commander Calder," Price said, extending a hand. "I hear your people had a rough night." Calder shook it briefly. "They're alive," Price nodded, lips pressing together in a way that suggested he had expected nothing less. "Good, that's good." His gaze slid to Harper, lingering. "We'll need to talk to your doctor." Harper felt the weight of that sentence before anyone said her name. Price continued. "Administration has concerns about protocol deviations." Calder's voice was even. "Protocol kept my people bleeding." Price didn't argue. "I understand. Still, we have to answer to oversight." Harper closed her chart and turned. "I'm available," she said. Price studied her openly now. Up close, he took in the lean build, the absence of ornament, the eyes that did not soften under scrutiny. "Dr. Reed," he said, testing the name, "walk with me." They moved into a quieter corridor where the air smelled faintly of cleaning solution and something older, paper, perhaps, or dust. The administrative offices were removed from trauma by design, insulated from urgency. Price gestured toward a small conference room. Inside, the table was bare, the chairs stiff, the walls decorated with framed mission statements that spoke of excellence without defining it. "Sit," Price said. Harper did. She placed her hands flat on the table, palms down, shoulders relaxed. She had learned that appearing defensive invited interrogation. Calm invited conversation. Price sat opposite her. "Your file is unusual," he began. "Not incomplete, not falsified, simply sealed." Harper met his gaze. "I don't control that." Price tilted his head. "Most people who say that are lying. Most people haven't earned the inconvenience," Harper replied. A flicker crossed Price's face. Irritation or curiosity, it was hard to tell. "You intervened without clearance. You performed procedures outside assigned authority." "There was no time to ask permission," Harper said. "If I had waited, you'd be filling out death notifications." Price exhaled slowly. "You're not wrong. That complicates things." A knock interrupted them. Price looked annoyed, then called, "Yes?" The door opened to reveal Lieutenant Commander Aaron Bishop, early 40s, compact build, shoulders rounded slightly forward, or as if bracing against impact, even at rest. His hair was dark and cut close, with a patch of gray at the temples. A neatly kept mustache framed a mouth that rarely smiled. Bishop's eyes were sharp but tired, the eyes of someone who had spent too long balancing competing demands without a clean win. "Commander Calder asked me to sit in," Bishop said. "Medical liaison." Price nodded reluctantly. "Fine." Bishop took a seat beside Harper, not crowding her, not avoiding proximity either. He glanced at her once, a quick assessment, then focused on Price. "She saved 2 lives last night," Bishop said. "One of them was mine, 10 years ago." Price's eyebrows rose. "Is that so?" Bishop didn't elaborate. "I recognize the work." Silence stretched. Price tapped his pen against the table once, then set it down. "Here's the problem," he said. "If we acknowledge what she did without acknowledging who she is, we open ourselves to questions we can't answer." Harper's voice remained steady. "Then don't acknowledge me. Acknowledge the outcome." Price smiled thinly. "That's not how systems work." "Then the system is poorly designed," Harper replied. Bishop hid a smile behind his mustache. Price leaned back, studying Harper as if she were an equation that refused to balance. "You're going to stay on duty," he said finally. "Observation only, for now." Harper nodded. "Understood." As they stood to leave, Bishop paused. "Dr. Reed," he said quietly, "good to see you working again." Harper's eyes flicked to his. "Likewise." Outside, Calder waited near the windows overlooking the parking lot. Sunlight had finally broken through, glinting off windshields, revealing the blue edge of the ocean beyond the buildings. "How'd it go?" Calder asked. "They want to put me on a leash," Harper said. "Long enough to see if I bite." Calder huffed softly. "You won't." "No," Harper agreed. "I don't." They were interrupted by a nurse pushing a wheelchair. In it sat Chief Petty Officer Daniel Rourke, late 40s, broad-chested despite recent weight loss, face weathered by years of salt and sun. His beard was thick and graying, eyes sharp but rimmed with fatigue. A combat injury had taken part of his lower leg years earlier, replaced now by a prosthetic hidden beneath his uniform pants. Rourke carried himself with stubborn dignity, refusing assistance he clearly needed. "Commander," Rourke said, nodding to Calder. His gaze shifted to Harper. "You're the doc who kept Delaney breathing." Harper inclined her head. "He did the hard part." Rourke snorted. "That kid's too stubborn to die." His eyes softened briefly. "Thank you." As Rourke was wheeled away, Calder watched him go. "He doesn't thank people lightly." "I know the type," Harper said. Later that afternoon, Harper stepped outside for the first time since dawn. The courtyard was small, enclosed by concrete and glass, but the air carried the unmistakable scent of the ocean. A stray dog lay near the shade of a planter, a medium-sized mutt with sand-colored fur, one ear permanently bent, ribs faintly visible beneath its coat. It looked up as Harper approached, tail thumping once against the concrete. "You shouldn't be here," she said quietly. The dog blinked, unconcerned. She crouched, letting it sniff her hand. Its nose was warm, breath steady, alive. All from across the courtyard, Evan Hale watched through the glass doors. He leaned casually against the frame, hands in his pockets, expression pleasant. When Harper noticed him, he offered a small wave. "Impressive work," Evan said when she approached. His voice was smooth, practiced. "You don't see that kind of decisiveness often." Harper regarded him coolly. "You don't see most things that matter." Evan smiled wider. "We should talk sometime. People with unusual skills tend to benefit from support." "I don't need sponsors," Harper said. "No," Evan agreed. "You need protection." Before she could respond, Victor Hale joined his son, placing a hand lightly on Evan's shoulder. Up close, Victor's presence was heavier than his frame suggested. His eyes assessed Harper not as a person, but as an asset, or a liability. "Dr. Reed," Victor said, voice calm, "we appreciate what you do for our service members." Harper met his gaze. "I do it for them, not for you." Victor chuckled softly. "Of course." He turned away, guiding Evan with him. "Come, we've seen enough." As they left, Calder appeared at Harper's side. "They make you uneasy," he said. "They should make you uneasy," Harper replied. "Men who watch instead of act usually have reasons." Calder nodded slowly. "I'll keep an eye on them." The afternoon faded into evening without incident. Delaney remained stable. Brooks was out of surgery and expected to recover. The department breathed easier. Harper returned to her notes, finishing the last of her documentation, as the sun dipped low, painting the windows gold. She felt the familiar tension settle in her shoulders. Not exhaustion, but awareness. Being noticed was dangerous. Being necessary was worse. Outside, the tide shifted again, quiet and patient, waiting for the next opening. The hospital changed its posture after a scare. It didn't relax, it recalibrated. By evening, the emergency department had found a new rhythm. Quieter on the surface, sharper underneath. Conversations shortened. Doors closed more softly. Cameras seemed to blink with intention rather than habit. Harper Reed felt it immediately. She worked the late shift under observation, a word that sounded benign until it followed you everywhere. Her chart access was limited. Procedures required countersignatures. A resident lingered a beat longer than necessary when she entered a room, as if trying to decide whether proximity to her was permission or liability. Harper adjusted without complaint. She always had. Constraint did not slow her. It forced clarity. She read more carefully, listened longer, and spoke only when the cost of silence outweighed the trouble of being heard. Commander Noah Calder checked in twice before midnight, not formally. He passed through the department with the pretext of updates, his presence steadying without trying to dominate. Up close, fatigue had settled into him. Faint bruises beneath his eyes, the tightness at the corners of his mouth deepened by responsibility rather than anger. He asked practical questions, absorbed the answers, moved on. "You holding up?" he asked Harper near the medication room, voice low. "I've been watched before," she said. "It wears off." Calder nodded. "It shouldn't have to." "No," she agreed, "but it does." He hesitated, then added, "Price's hands are tied. Oversight's asking for a timeline, names, reasons." "And you?" "I'm asking for outcomes," he said. "That buys time." Time was a currency Harper spent carefully. Near midnight, a new patient rolled in from triage, a civilian contractor who had collapsed on base during equipment testing. The man was Leon Whitaker, early 40s, thick-set with a receding hairline and a beard that looked more neglected than styled. He smelled faintly of machine oil and coffee. His eyes darted when people spoke too quickly, the telltale sign of anxiety layered over pain. Vitals were unstable but not catastrophic. The resident assigned to him spoke too fast, eager to prove competence. Harper listened, corrected once, gently. The resident flushed, but complied. Whitaker stabilized within minutes. When he was wheeled out, he caught Harper's sleeve. "You didn't talk down to me," he said, supponed. "Most do." Harper freed her sleeve. "Pain makes people small enough without help." It was an offhand comment, but Whitaker nodded like it mattered. From the observation window, Evan Hale watched the exchange. Tonight he wore a casual jacket over a pressed shirt, sleeves rolled just enough to look approachable. His hair was neatly styled, a faint stubble lining his jaw. a deliberate choice to soften angles that would otherwise look predatory. He leaned against the glass, weight on one leg, studying Harper with open interest. He didn't approach her this time. He waited. At 1:17 a.m., an alarm chirped from Bay 3. Not a scream, just a warning. A post-op SEAL patient's oxygen saturation dipped. The resident reached for the chart. Harper glanced at the patient, at the way his chest moved, uneven and shallow. "Turn him," she said. "Now." The resident hesitated. "We're supposed to—" "Now," Harper repeated, firm. They turned the patient. The saturation climbed. The alarm silenced itself, almost embarrassed. The resident swallowed. "Thanks." Harper nodded once. "Next time, trust your eyes." By the time the shift slowed, the hospital corridors had emptied into echo. Night cleaning crews moved methodically, their carts whispering along the floors. The smell of disinfectant grew stronger, sharper. Harper stepped outside into the courtyard again. The stray dog lay in the same spot near the planter, curled tight against the cold concrete. Up close, she could see he was older than she'd first thought, cloudiness at the edges of his eyes, stiffness in the way he unfolded himself to stand. A scar ran along his flank, healed poorly. "You're still here," she said. The dog wagged his tail once, cautious but hopeful. She crouched and offered him the last of a protein bar. He took it gently, teeth careful. Trust, built slowly. From the doorway, Calder watched without interrupting. "You keep finding the strays," he said. "They find me," Harper replied. Calder studied the dog. "We'll get him checked. He shouldn't be sleeping on concrete." "Neither should anyone," Harper said. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, the ocean's distant hush threading through the city noise. Calder spoke again, quieter. "Hale's been requesting access logs, donations, equipment audits. He's circling." "Circling means he doesn't know where to land," Harper said. "That's what worries me," Calder replied. "Men like him don't circle without reason." Inside, Victor Hale met with Dr. Samuel Price in a glass-walled office overlooking the lobby. Victor's posture was relaxed, his hands folded neatly, expression game. Price sat rigid, fingers steepled, the lines around his mouth deepening. "Our company wants to help," Victor said, voice smooth. "Increased funding, better equipment, faster approvals." Price forced a polite smile. "We appreciate the support." Victor's eyes flicked toward the corridor where Harper had passed moments earlier. "Naturally, transparency matters, especially when exceptions occur." Price bristled. "Dr. Reed's actions were medically justified." "Of course," Victor agreed. "I admire initiative. I simply worry about liability." The word hung between them, heavy and precise. Later, Evan Hale found Harper near the elevators. He smiled, disarming. "Busy night." "Every night," Harper said, not stopping. He matched her pace, easily. "You don't make many friends here. I'm not here for friends." "Everyone says that," Evan replied. "Until they need them." She stopped. He stopped too. Close now, she could see the calculation behind his eyes, the way charm functioned like a tool rather than an instinct. "What do you want?" she asked. Evan's smile softened. "To make sure talent doesn't get crushed by bureaucracy. People like you deserve options." "I already have one," Harper said. "It's called doing my job." Evan laughed quietly. "For now." She stepped into the elevator. The doors slid shut between them, reflecting his pleasant expression back at him. When Harper returned to the department, Calder was waiting with Linda Morales. Morales' face was tight. "Ben Wyatt's labs came back," Morales said. "That rhythm you caught? Cardiology thinks it's congenital. If you hadn't flagged it," Calder finished the thought, "we'd be having a different conversation." Morales nodded. "Admin can't ignore that." Harper felt no satisfaction, only a familiar ache, the knowledge that proof never erased risk, it only changed its shape. At dawn, the hospital breathed again. The marine layer lifted in thin sheets. Light spilled into the corridors, turning glass warm. Harper finished her notes and handed over care, every line precise. As she left, the stray dog followed her to the gate and stopped. He sat, tail still, eyes steady. "I'll be back," she said, unsure why the promise felt necessary. The dog watched her go, as if understanding the cost of waiting. Behind the glass, Victor Hale observed the same moment, his reflection overlaying the scene. He smiled, not at the dog, not at Harper, but at the inevitability he believed he could shape. The lights stayed on, the watchers remained, and somewhere between vigilance and fatigue, the lines that didn't appear on maps were being redrawn. Morning arrived without ceremony. The marine layer thinned and lifted, leaving San Diego washed in a pale, honest light that made buildings look less forgiving and people more exposed. From the upper floors of the Naval Medical Center, the city stretched toward the water, orderly and indifferent, as if nothing inside the hospital could ever matter to it. For Harper Reed, the day began with a meeting she had not requested. She stood outside Conference Room C, hands relaxed at her sides, temporary badge still clinging stubbornly to her scrub top. Through the glass wall, she could see silhouettes already seated. Commander Calder, Dr. Samuel Price, and, unmistakably, Victor Hale. The door opened before she knocked. "Dr. Reed," Price said, voice clipped. He was a thin man in his early 60s, shoulders slightly hunched from decades of administrative posture rather than age. His white coat looked more like a shield than a uniform. "Come in." The room smelled faintly of coffee and polished wood. Victor Hale sat at the far end of the table, jacket perfectly tailored, salt and pepper hair combed back with deliberate restraint. His face was smooth, almost pleasant, but his eyes carried a sharpness that never rested. He rose when Harper entered, offering a courteous nod. "Dr. Reed," Victor said, "we finally meet properly." Harper inclined her head, but did not shake his hand. She took the empty chair without waiting to be invited. Calder watched the exchange with narrowed eyes. He sat upright, hands folded, posture that spoke of command, even without insignia. The faint shadow beneath his eyes suggested he hadn't slept much since the SEAL incident. Victor resumed his seat. "This isn't an interrogation," he said smoothly. "Think of it as clarification." Price cleared his throat. "Mr. Hale's foundation has long supported this facility. Naturally, when concerns are raised—" "Concerns?" Harper echoed quietly. Victor smiled. "Words matter, Doctor. You intervened outside standard protocol, successfully, yes. But success does not remove the need for process." Harper met his gaze. "Process didn't hear the arrhythmia. I did." A pause followed, not uncomfortable, calculated. Victor leaned back slightly. "You're direct. I appreciate that. But medicine inside a military system isn't just about saving lives. It's about accountability, predictability." "Bodies aren't predictable," Harper said. "That's why we train." Calder shifted. "She followed clinical judgment," he said evenly. "And she was right." Victor nodded, as if conceding a minor point. "I don't dispute that. My concern is scale. One exception becomes precedent. Precedent becomes chaos." Harper studied him. "You're worried about chaos? Or about control?" The air cooled. Price looked between them, tension pulling his mouth tight. Victor's smile didn't fade. "Control keeps people alive," he said. "Excuse any commander." Calder's jaw flexed. "I didn't invite her here to be dressed down." Victor held up a hand. "Nor did I. In fact, my proposal is simple." He turned to Harper. "Consulting role, temporary. We formalize what you do best. No more shadows, no more improvisation without cover." "And the cost?" Harper asked. Victor's eyes glinted. "Visibility." She exhaled once. "I didn't come here to be visible. No one exceptional ever does," Victor replied. The meeting ended without resolution. No signatures, no threats, just an understanding that the ground beneath Harper's feet had shifted again. Outside, Calder fell into step beside her. "You okay?" "I don't like men who smile when they corner you," Harper said. Calder snorted softly. "Then you picked the wrong institution." They stopped near the ambulance bay. Helicopters sat dormant on the pad, their blades still, like beasts at rest. "There's something else," Calder said. "Training exercise this afternoon. Joint drill, SEALs, corpsmen, trauma staff. Price wants you observing only." "Observing what?" Harper asked. "How they respond under pressure," Calder said, "and how they respond to you." She nodded once. "I'll watch." The training ground lay inland, a controlled sprawl of concrete barriers, simulated wreckage, and mobile triage tents. Heat shimmered off the ground by early afternoon, turning the air heavy and sharp. The SEAL team assembled near the perimeter, men and women built like coiled wire, movements economical, faces unreadable. Harper noticed one man immediately. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Brick Lawson stood apart from the group, arms crossed over a chest that looked like it had been carved rather than built. Mid-40s, shaved head, beard trimmed close and flecked with gray. His nose had been broken more than once, and his eyes held a steady, skeptical intelligence. He watched the med staff with thinly veiled distrust. Lawson's reputation preceded him. Multiple deployments, injuries that should have ended his career, a habit of questioning authority that had earned him both commendations and quiet warnings. "Who's the civilian?" Lawson asked aloud, not unkind, but not subtle. Calder answered before Harper could. "She's medical." Lawson's gaze sharpened. "That's not an answer." Harper stepped forward. "Neither is assuming rank equals competence." A few heads turned. Lawson studied her for a long beat, then smiled, a quick, sharp curve of the mouth. "Fair," he said. "Let's see what you do when it's loud." The drill began without warning. An explosion sound cracked the air. Smoke poured from behind barriers. Shouts followed. Casualties were dragged into the open, makeup and blood packs convincing enough to make interns flinch. Harper stayed back, as ordered, eyes scanning. She noted hesitation points. The medic who froze for half a second too long. The SEAL who bypassed triage to carry a teammate himself. Bleeding discipline along with blood. Then something went wrong. A training charge misfired. Not catastrophic, but enough. A concrete fragment sliced into a medic's leg, deep and ugly. Real blood replaced fake. The drill halted. Confusion rippled. Lawson moved first. "Doc," he barked, looking at Harper's. "He's arterial," Price shouted from the sidelines. "Stand down. Medical team only." Harper didn't wait. She was already moving, hands steady, mind narrowed to a single channel. She knelt beside the injured medic, a young woman, maybe 22, dark hair plastered to her forehead with sweat and blood. Her face was pale, eyes wide with shock. "I'm here," Harper said calmly. "Look at me." She applied pressure, precise and firm, fingers finding the vessel by feel. "Tourniquet," she ordered. A corpsman hesitated. Lawson grabbed the kit and handed it over. The bleeding slowed, the medic's breathing steadied. Silence fell, broken only by wind rattling loose tarps. Price approached, face flushed. That was not authorized. Harper stood, blood on her gloves, heat on her skin. Neither was the injury. Lawson stepped closer, towering but respectful. "You did good," he said simply. Price opened his mouth. Calder spoke first. "Debrief in 10. The training ended early. Later, as equipment was packed away and tempers cooled, Lawson found Harper near the water station. He offered her a bottle. "You don't move like hospital trained," he said. "Neither do you," she replied. He chuckled. "Fair again. Most docs panic when things get messy." "Messy is honest," Harper said. Lawson studied her. "Whatever game Hale's playing," he said quietly, "it's not about safety. Men like him don't fund things they can't steer." Harper met his gaze. "Men like you don't warn strangers without reason." He shrugged. "Call it professional courtesy." Dusk fell. The stray dog appeared at the edge of the training ground, tail wagging cautiously. Someone must have fed him. His coat looked cleaner, his eyes brighter. Harper crouched. "You followed me." The dog sat, patient. From a distance, Victor Hale watched the scene from a black SUV parked beyond the fence. His expression was thoughtful, fingers tapping once against the doorframe. "Interesting," he murmured. The lights along the perimeter flickered on, drawing hard lines against the darkening sky. Lines of authority, lines of intent, lines that didn't appear on maps but governed everything. Harper straightened, the weight of attention pressing in again. She didn't look toward Hale. She didn't need to. She already knew the game had moved from observation to engagement. Night returned to San Diego with a false calm. The heat of the day bled slowly into the pavement, leaving the air heavy and restless, as if the city itself were holding its breath. From the upper floors of the Naval Medical Center, the harbor lights shimmered against dark water, beautiful and indifferent in the way only the ocean could be. Harper Reed felt the shift before anyone named it. After the training incident, her presence stopped from being questioned quietly and started being discussed openly. Nurses lowered their voices when she passed. Residents watched her hands more than her face, some with respect, others with resentment thinly disguised as curiosity. Being seen carried weight, and weight demanded payment. She was finishing a late consult when Linda Morales caught up with her near the elevators. Morales looked more tired than usual, her shoulders tight, her coffee untouched. Price wants you in his office tomorrow morning, Morales said. Early. About? Harper asked, already knowing the answer would be incomplete. Morales hesitated. Funding review. External oversight. Hale's people are pushing. Harper nodded once. Thank you for the warning. Morales studied her for a moment. You didn't do anything wrong. I rarely do, Harper said quietly. That's not the same thing. Outside the hospital, the stray dog waited near the gate, sitting as if he understood boundaries better than most humans. Under the yellow streetlight, his coat looked more brown than gray, his ribs less visible than before. Someone had been feeding him regularly now. He rose when Harper approached, tail wagging in a slow, hopeful arc. You're getting bold, she murmured. The dog stepped closer, sniffed her shoes, then sat again. Older, she guessed. 8, maybe 9. A life that had taken more than it gave back. She crouched and scratched behind his ears. He leaned into the touch with a low sound that was almost a sigh. From across the street, a black SUV idled with its lights off. Harper didn't notice it. She rarely looked for watchers unless she felt threatened, and tonight she only felt tired. The SUV did not follow her when she walked toward the temporary housing complex reserved for on-call medical staff. It remained where it was, engine humming softly, as if waiting for confirmation rather than opportunity. Inside her small apartment, Harper moved with habitual efficiency. Shoes by the door, jacket on the chair, she washed her hands longer than necessary, letting hot water run over skin that still remembered blood and pressure. When she finally sat, the silence pressed in, thick and unfamiliar. Her phone buzzed once. Unknown number. You impressed the wrong people today. She stared at the screen, pulse steady. Then another message arrived. Visibility has consequences. Harper set the phone face down. She had lived with worse threats than anonymous texts. What unsettled her was not the warning itself, but the precision of its timing. Across town, Victor Hale stood in a private office overlooking the bay. Jacket removed, sleeves rolled to reveal forearms marked with faint scars. Old, surgical, clean. He poured himself a measured drink and watched the lights on the water, expression unreadable. Still think she's an asset? Evan Hale asked from the doorway. Evan leaned casually against the frame, hair immaculate, smile easy. He looked nothing like his father, softer, more approachable, but his eyes carried the same calculating patience. Victor took a sip. Assets don't resist framing, he said. She does. Which makes her interesting, Evan replied. And dangerous. Victor's mouth twitched. Danger is manageable. Integrity is unpredictable. Back at the hospital, Commander Calder reviewed incident reports long after midnight. The words blurred together. Unauthorized intervention, chain of command, positive outcome. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing a hand over his face. He trusted Harper. That was the problem. Trust had a way of complicating clean solutions. His phone rang. Victor Hale's name lit the screen. Calder let it ring twice before answering. This is late. Apologies, Victor said smoothly, but this urgency rarely respects schedules. What do you want? To prevent a misunderstanding from becoming a conflict, Victor replied. Dr. Reed is exceptional. Exceptionality attracts scrutiny. She saved a life today, Calder said. So did the SEAL team, Victor countered. Yet, only one of them disrupted protocol. Calder's jaw tightened. You're pushing too hard. I'm offering protection, Victor said, from systems that crush people who refuse to fit. Calder ended the call without responding. The next morning arrived sharp and bright. The marine layer was gone, replaced by hard sunlight that left no room for shadows to hide in. Harper walked into Dr. Price's office, precisely on time. Price sat behind his desk, fingers laced, eyes tired. Victor Hale occupied the chair opposite, posture relaxed, as if this were his space by right. Dr. Reed, Price began, we've received a formal request. Harper remained standing. From, Victor answered, from my foundation. We're proposing a pilot program, rapid response trauma consultation. You would lead it. And the catch? Harper asked. Victor smiled faintly. Oversight, documentation, media transparency. Price added quietly, it would shield you from unilateral discipline. Harper considered them both. And bind me to your narrative. Victor inclined his head. Narratives exist whether we choose them or not. I choose mine, Harper said. Price sighed. This is bigger than you. It always is, she replied. That's how people justify pressure. The meeting ended in stalemate, again. Outside, Marcus Brick Lawson waited near the training yard. Fence, arms folded, sunglasses hiding eyes that missed nothing. He looked out of place in civilian clothes, cargo pants, faded t-shirt, but the weight of command still clung to him. "You're popular," he said as Harper approached. 15 minutes of fame, she replied. "Feels longer." Lawson removed his glasses, revealing eyes lined by sun and memory. Hale's men were asking questions after the drill, not medical ones. "What kind?" Harper asked. "The kind that start with what if and end with liability," Lawson said. "I've seen this before. Someone gets too effective, too fast." "And?" she prompted. "And they either get absorbed," he said, "or removed." The stray dog trotted up behind Harper, tail wagging. Lawson glanced down and huffed a quiet laugh. "Even your backup's scrappy." "He's honest," Harper said. "That's rare." Lawson's expression softened. "So are people who run toward chaos without needing permission." She met his gaze. "You offering advice or warning?" "Both," he said. "If you're going to stay visible, choose your allies carefully." That evening, a minor incident became a major one. A supply audit flagged missing equipment from the trauma wing, small, expensive items easily miscounted. The report landed on Price's desk with Victor Hale copied. Harper was called in, not as an accused, but as a witness. Her access logs were reviewed, her movements dissected. She answered every question calmly, precisely, truthfully. The equipment was later found, misfiled, logged under a different department, but the damage had been done. Doubt, once introduced, lingered like a stain. By nightfall, the story had leaked, not officially, just enough. Harper walked back toward the gate, the dog padding at her side now, no longer waiting to be invited. She stopped and knelt, resting her forehead briefly against his. "I didn't ask for this," she whispered. The dog licked her cheek, clumsy and sincere. From the shadows, Evan Hale watched, phone in hand, recording nothing, storing everything. He smiled, not cruelly, but with interest. "Visibility," he murmured to himself, "always costs more than people expect." Harper stood, squared her shoulders, and walked on. She did not look back. She knew now what being seen demanded, and she understood, with quiet certainty, that retreat was no longer an option. The call came just after midnight, when San Diego looked calm enough to pretend nothing dangerous ever happened here. The harbor lights reflected clean lines across the water, and the air smelled of salt and diesel and the faint sweetness of eucalyptus drifting down from the hills. From a distance, the Pacific lay flat and dark, obedient. Up close, it never was. Harper Reed was halfway through rewriting a patient note when the overhead tone cut through the ward. Sharp, urgent, unmistakable. "Inbound medevac, SEAL team, maritime incident." The room reacted before the words finished echoing. Chairs scraped back, screens flickered awake. Nurses moved with practiced speed, hands already gloved, faces tightening into focus. This was not a drill. It never sounded like one when it wasn't. Commander Calder appeared beside Harper within seconds, jacket already shrugged on, jaw set. "Boat collision off Point Loma," he said. "Training exercise turned live. Multiple injuries. One critical." Harper stood, heart steady, mind narrowing. "How long?" 8 minutes, Calder replied. "Helicopters ahead of schedule." 8 minutes was generous. 8 minutes was nothing. As they moved toward the trauma bay, Marcus Brick Lawson came in through the side entrance, boots still wet, shirt streaked with salt and blood that wasn't all his. Without gear, without ceremony, he looked older than he had at the training yard, lines etched deeper into his face by stress and responsibility. His beard was damp, his eyes hard, alert, carrying the weight of men who hadn't made it to shore on their own. "Too stable," Lawson said without preamble. "One knot." "Who?" Calder asked. Lawson hesitated for half a second too long. "Lieutenant Aaron Cole." The name landed heavy. Cole was 32, one of Lawson's best swimmers, known for his discipline and relentless calm under pressure. A man who never cut corners. A man who didn't panic. Yet, Cole was the one Lawson called not. The situation was already bad. "What happened?" Harper asked. "A hull breach," Lawson said. He took a metal strut to the chest. "We got him breathing, but barely." The helicopter thundered in moments later, rotors slicing the night air into violent pieces. The bay doors flew open. and cold wind rushed through the corridor, carrying the sharp smell of ocean water and fuel. The stretcher rolled in fast, framed by flight medics shouting vitals. Male 32, blunt chest trauma, suspected pulmonary contusion, possible cardiac injury, pressure unstable. Harper's eyes went straight to Cole's face. He was pale, lips tinged blue, hair plastered to his forehead. A man built like a runner, lean, powerful, now frighteningly still. His chest rose unevenly, each breath a visible effort. "Get ultrasound," Harper said. "Now." A resident moved, hands shaking just enough to be noticed. The screen lit up with shadows and motion, fluid where it shouldn't be. Harper leaned in, eyes narrowing. "There," she said. "Cardiac tamponade." The words cut through the room like a blade. Calder swore under his breath. "Or, he won't make it," Harper replied, voice level. "We do it here." The room froze for a fraction of a second. This was not protocol. This was not safe. This was necessary. Before Calder could answer, another voice cut in. "Absolutely not." Victor Hale stood just inside the bay doors, suit immaculate, expression composed despite the chaos. How he'd arrived so quickly was a question Harper didn't have time to ask. "This is a medical facility, not a battlefield," Victor said calmly. "You open a chest in here, and you expose this hospital to—" Harper didn't look at him. Her hands were already moving, snapping on gloves, eyes fixed on the patient. "He's dying." "That's not your call," Victor replied. "It is if I want him alive," she said. Calder stepped between them. "Mr. Hale, step back." Victor's gaze sharpened. "You'll regret this." "Move," Lawson said quietly from behind, voice low and lethal. He didn't raise it. He didn't need to. For a moment, the room balanced on the edge of something worse than failure. Then Victor stepped back, jaw tight, eyes burning with calculation. Harper worked fast. Incision, suction. The smell of blood mixed with salt water filled the bay. Her hands moved with brutal precision. Every motion earned, not learned from textbooks, but carved into muscle memory by nights that never made it into reports. She relieved the pressure around the heart. Blood surged, then slowed. Cole's chest stuttered, then rose more evenly. The monitor screamed, then softened. "Pressure climbing," the resident said, awe cracking his voice. "Heart rate stabilizing." Harper didn't look up. "Pack and prep for transport. He goes to surgery now." The bay exhaled as one. Lawson stepped closer, eyes locked on Cole. "You stay with him," he said to Harper. It wasn't a request. It was trust, given without paperwork. She nodded. The operating room swallowed them whole, lights blinding, noise sharpening. Calder scrubbed in beside her, movements efficient, silent. They worked together without discussion, each anticipating the other's hands, the way people did only after shared chaos. Outside the OR, Victor Hale stood perfectly still, phone pressed to his ear. "Yes," he said quietly. "It happened." A pause. "No, I couldn't stop it." Another pause, longer this time. "We'll adjust." Hours later, dawn crept back into the city, pale and unsure. Cole was alive, sedated, stable. The danger wasn't gone, but it had been delayed, which in medicine was often the same thing. Harper peeled off her gloves, hands trembling now that the work was done. Calder rested a hand briefly on her shoulder. "You crossed a line," he said softly. "I know," she replied. "I'll stand by it," he added. Outside, Lawson waited, arms folded, shoulders sagging now that the crisis had passed. He looked at Harper with something close to reverence, then corrected it into something steadier. "You saved him," he said. Harper shook her head. "We did." Lawson's mouth twitched. "Still." As Harper stepped outside for air, the stray dog appeared from behind a supply shed, tail wagging hard enough to shake his whole body. His coat was damp, probably from sleeping near the docks, but his eyes were bright. She crouched, pressing her forehead briefly to his. "You really don't know when to leave," she murmured. From the parking structure above, Evan Hale watched the scene unfold, face half lit by the rising sun. He lowered his phone, lips curling into a thin smile. "She chose," he said to himself. "Good." Harper stood, shoulders squared, blood still drying on her sleeves. The ocean beyond the buildings rolled and shifted, refusing calm, refusing silence. She had crossed more than one line tonight, and there would be no going back. Morning did not arrive gently. It came bright and unambiguous, sunlight cutting through the hospital's glass like a verdict. The Pacific lay beyond the buildings in clean blue plains, deceptively calm, as if the night's violence had been an argument already settled. Harper Reed slept for exactly 90 minutes in a chair outside the ICU before Linda Morales nudged her awake with a paper cup of coffee and a look that said the world was moving whether she joined it or not. Harper took the cup, drank without tasting, and stood. Her body felt heavy but functional, the kind of tired that came from work completed, not from fear. Lieutenant Aaron Cole was stable, sedated, ventilated, alive. The cardiac surgeon had finished an hour earlier and left a note that was clinical and generous in equal measure. Rapid intervention prevented irreversible damage. It was as close to praise as surgeons ever allowed themselves. Commander Calder found Harper by the observation window. He looked older in daylight, the lines around his eyes sharpened by fatigue, but his posture was steady. He didn't speak at first. He simply stood beside her, watching the monitor trace Cole's heartbeat in small, precise peaks. "You'll be reviewed," Calder said finally. "Formally, there will be questions." "I expected that," Harper replied. "There will also be witnesses," he added. "Very good ones." From the far end of the unit, Marcus Brick Lawson approached with measured steps. He had shaved, beard trimmed back to regulation neatness, though the stiffness in his shoulders suggested he hadn't slept at all. He stopped a respectful distance away, eyes on the floor for a beat before meeting Harper's gaze. "My team filed statements," Lawson said. "All of them. Same version. You did what had to be done." Harper nodded. "Thank you." Lawson hesitated, then extended his hand. She took it. His grip was firm, grounded, the handshake of a man who trusted actions, more than words. Outside the ICU, Victor Hale stood with Evan at his shoulder, both impeccably dressed, both watching the corridor like chess players studying a board they didn't fully control. Victor's face was calm, but his eyes had hardened into something brittle. Evan leaned in. "You still want to push?" Victor didn't look at him. "Not today," he said. "We don't fight momentum head on." "Then when?" Victor finally turned, studying the room where Harper stood framed by glass and morning light, surrounded by uniformed men who looked at her like a fixed point. "When it costs her something," he said quietly. "Everything does, eventually." The review convened by afternoon. It wasn't a courtroom. It was a conference room with too much light and not enough air, walls lined with flags and framed mission statements. The panel was composed of people who had earned their authority through service rather than ambition. Medical officers, operational, commanders, one civilian oversight representative who looked uncomfortable in uniformed company. Harper stood at the center, hands relaxed at her sides. She answered questions directly. She did not apologize. She did not embellish. When asked why she'd proceeded without clearance, she said simply, "Because the patient was dying." When asked if she would do it again, she said, "Yes." The room went quiet, not hostile, not approving, considering. Calder spoke next, then Lawson. A flight medic followed, voice unsteady but certain. A resident, young and earnest, described the moment the monitor changed its mind. Each account added weight to the same conclusion. Intervention had been necessary. Outcome had justified risk. The civilian representative cleared her throat. "Doctor," she said to Harper, "are you aware that your actions expose the institution to liability?" Harper met her eyes. "I'm aware that inaction exposes people to graves." There were no smiles, but there were nods. The decision was delivered without ceremony. Harper Reed would not be disciplined. Her authority would be clarified, not curtailed. A rapid response maritime trauma protocol would be drafted, with her as clinical lead, reporting through Calder's command. Oversight would exist. So would trust. Victor Hale received the news in a quiet hallway outside the room. He listened, nodded once, and offered his congratulations with a grace that felt practiced. "For what it's worth," he told Harper as they passed, "I respect conviction." She didn't stop walking. "For what it's worth," she replied, "I don't need your respect." By evening, the hospital's tempo softened. The crisis passed into memory the way all crises did, leaving marks only on those who had stood closest. Harper found herself back in the courtyard, the air cooler now, eucalyptus sharper in her lungs. The stray dog waited near the planter, sitting as if assigned the spot. "You stayed," she said. He rose and padded toward her, tail wagging in earnest, ears flopping with each step. Up close, she noticed a tag now hanging from a new collar, blue nylon, slightly too big. Linda Morales appeared behind her with a small smile. Facilities named him, she said. Atlas figured it fit. Atlas sat when Harper knelt, patient and proud, eyes bright. She scratched his chest and felt the steady thump of his heart beneath her hand. "That okay?" Morales asked. "It is," Harper said. They stood together for a moment, two women who had seen enough to know when to let silence work. Morales spoke again, softer. "You changed how people look at the rules." Harper shook her head. "The rules changed. I just listened." At sunset, Lawson stopped by one last time before heading back to base. He looked at Atlas, then at Harper. "Cole asked for you," he said, "when he wakes." "Tell him I'll come by," Harper replied. Lawson nodded. "You know," he added, "there's a saying among my guys. The ocean tests what you claim to be." "And?" Harper asked. "And it doesn't care what you want to hide," Lawson said, then turned and walked away. Night returned, quieter this time. The harbor lights came on one by one, reflecting long, steady lines across the water. Harper walked Atlas toward the gate, leash loose in her hand. She stopped at the fence and looked out toward the dark horizon. Evan Hale watched from a distance, alone now, his earlier certainty replaced by calculation. He lifted his phone, then lowered it again. Not tonight. Some battles were better postponed. Harper didn't see him. She didn't need to. She turned back toward the hospital, Atlas at her side, the building's lights warm and constant. Inside waited work and people, and a role she hadn't asked for but had earned. The world hadn't softened. It had simply made room. At the shoreline beyond the city, the tide moved in and out, patient as ever. It did not erase what had happened. It held it, quietly, the way it held everything that survived the night. Sometimes the greatest miracles do not arrive with thunder or fire. They arrive quietly, through steady hands, a brave choice, and a heart that refuses to look away. In this story, no angel descended from the sky, no voice echoed from heaven. And yet, life was returned, hope was restored, and the forgotten were seen. That is how God often works, through ordinary people who choose love over fear, compassion over comfort, and courage over silence. Every day in our own lives, we are given the same choice: to pass by or to stop, to protect ourselves, or to protect someone smaller, weaker, forgotten. When we choose kindness, when we stand up for life, when we refuse to abandon a child, an animal, or a stranger in pain, we become part of that quiet miracle. Perhaps God does not always change the storm, but He places someone in the storm who knows how to hold on. If this story touched your heart, let it be more than a moment. Let it be a reminder to act with mercy today. Share this story with someone who feels unseen. Leave a comment and tell us what this story meant to you. Subscribe to the channel so more stories of hope can reach those who need them most. And may God bless you wherever you are watching from. May He protect your loved ones, heal the wounded places in your heart, and remind you that even in the darkest night, no soul, human or animal, ever walks alone.